The Galactic Council had a word for humans. Mirakel. It did not translate cleanly. The closest the human linguists could manage was something between myth-dwellers and the ones who tell themselves stories. The Veth used it the way old Earth people used naive. The Sorelian Compact used it the way people used fool. The Droon, who were the oldest spacefaring species in the known galaxy and had seen 1,000 civilizations rise and burn down to carbon, used it the way a tired professor uses the word student. It was not meant kindly. It was not meant cruelly either. That was the thing humans never fully understood about the Council species. They were not cruel. They were simply done. Done with hope. Done with surprise. Done with the long, expensive project of believing things could be different from how they had always been. The galaxy, they said, was what it was. The strong ate. The weak negotiated. The wise did both, depending on the season. Humans had been admitted to the Galactic Council on a probationary basis 43 years ago, after first contact near Jupiter's fourth moon. The Veth survey ship had been mapping the outer system, cataloging dead rocks, when their long-range sensors picked up something strange. A signal, repeating, mathematical. Not the signal of a species reaching out. The signal of a species that had already been talking to itself for decades and hadn't noticed anyone was listening. The Veth captain, a lean, silver-skinned being named Tessivar, had listened to the signal for 6 hours before calling her crew together. "They're broadcasting," she said. "Broadcasting what?" asked her navigator. "Everything. Music, arguments, news reports, entertainment. A program where they compete to cook food for judges." The crew was quiet. "They're broadcasting it into open space," Tessivar continued, "without encryption, without targeting, just into space, in case someone is listening." More quiet. "That is," her weapons officer said carefully, "either the most optimistic thing I have ever heard, or the most reckless." "With humans," Tessivar said, after a pause that would become famous in Council diplomatic history, "I suspect it is both." The first formal meeting between human representatives and the Galactic Council took place on a neutral station in the Outer Belt. Humanity sent 3 people: a diplomat named Carla Ewan, a physicist named Dr. Rajan Mehta, and, because no one on the selection committee could agree on the 3rd seat, a retired soldier named Gus Harker, who had apparently impressed someone important at some point and hadn't stopped trading on it since. The council sent 47 representatives from 32 species. The ratio was not accidental. Carla Ewan noticed. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and wrote nothing down because she didn't need to. She stood in the great circular chamber of the meeting hall, looked at 47 alien faces, arranged in a perfect arc above the small human delegation, and thought, "They want us to feel small." She felt it. She also filed it away and smiled. The Droon elder who spoke first was named Orith Velsen, and she had been alive for 900 years, which in Droon terms meant she was middle-aged and somewhat impatient. She looked at the 3 humans the way a geologist looks at an interesting but ultimately unremarkable rock formation. "You are new," Orith Velsen said. Her translator rendered it in flat, affectless English. "You have achieved basic interstellar capability. You have not yet destroyed yourselves. This is, statistically, notable." "Thank you," Carla said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. Many species achieve interstellar capability. Most destroy themselves shortly after. You have not, yet. "We're working on it," Gus Harker said. Every alien face in the chamber turned toward him. Carla closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "He means," Dr. Mehta said quickly, "that we are working to ensure we don't." "Of course," Orith Velsen said. She did not sound convinced. She sounded like someone who had heard this particular sentence before, in 37 different languages, and had watched every species that said it either fail or barely survive. "You will be granted observational status within the Council. You may attend proceedings. You may not vote. You may not enter Council space beyond designated corridors without clearance. You may not." "Can I ask a question?" Carla said. Silence. The kind that had weight. "Observers do not generally ask questions during the opening address," Orith Velsen said. "I understand, but I'll ask anyway." Carla's voice was completely calm. "What do we need to do to stop being observers?" Another silence. This one had a different texture. Surprise, maybe? Or something older than surprise. You would need to demonstrate value to the Council, Orithvel Sen said. Technological contribution, territorial stability, military capacity sufficient to defend Council borders, not merely your own. You would need to prove that you are not a liability. How long does that usually take? For most species? Between 80 and 300 years. Carla nodded. All right, she said. We'll be faster. The Veth Captain Tessavar, sitting in the third row of observers, made a note in her personal log that night. It said, I think I understand the cooking competition now. That was 43 years ago. 43 years of humans being politely tolerated in the corridors of the Council station. 43 years of human ships being given the least useful patrol routes in border space. 43 years of human scientists submitting research papers that the Droon peer reviewers returned with the academic equivalent of a pat on the head. 43 years of Marakel. It wasn't malice. That was the thing that Sergeant Adia Osei, youngest weapons officer in the UES fleet, currently stationed aboard the patrol corvette Meridian, had spent 6 years trying to explain to herself. It wasn't malice. The Council species didn't hate humans. They just didn't think about them much. The Meridian was a good ship, lean, fast, crew of 40. Built in the Ganymede yards 8 years ago with human hands and human engineering and a reactor design that the Veth Engineering Board had looked at and called functional, if inelegant. Commander Sarah Okafor ran it like she ran everything, with the particular calm of someone who had already thought through every way things could go wrong and made peace with all of them. Adia liked her. Everyone did. Not the way you like someone easy, the way you like someone true. It was a Tuesday. Humans had kept Earth time in space, which the Council species found either charming or baffling depending on who you asked, when the signal came in. Adia was running diagnostics on the port plasma array, which had been throwing phantom errors for a week and a half, when the comm board lit up across 3 frequencies at once. She looked at it. She looked at it the way you look at a thing before you understand it, when your brain is still trying to fit the shape of it into something familiar. 3 frequencies. That was a Council emergency broadcast. She knew the protocol. Everyone did. She ran to the bridge. Commander Okafor was already there. So was Lieutenant Patel, the nav officer, and Ensign Kwok, who was technically off duty, but had felt something in the ship's vibration change and come running anyway. Humans were like that. They felt things in ships. The signal resolved on the main display. It was audio and visual. The visual was a star map. The audio was in Cerealian, which the ship's translator rendered a half-second behind the original. This is a priority alert from the Galactic Council Emergency Coordination Office. All vessels in Sectors 7 through 12 are ordered to withdraw immediately to designated safe corridors. The Keth Warfleet has crossed the Marhan boundary. Repeat. The Keth Warfleet has crossed the Marhan boundary. All Council military assets are to converge on Relay Station Omicron 4 for coordinated defensive action. This is not a drill. This is not a drill. The bridge was quiet. The Keth. Adia had read about the Keth in her academy training. Every human officer had. They were in the chapter titled, Threats That Predate Humanity's Spaceflight Capability by 800 Years. They were a species built for one thing, or had rebuilt themselves for one thing, somewhere in their deep history, in a choice that no surviving record could fully explain. They were conquest, not empire, not expansion. Conquest. The difference mattered. Empires wanted resources, trade, labor. The Keth wanted the act of taking, the process of breaking. They moved through space the way a fire moves through dry wood. The last time the Keth had launched a major offensive, 4 Council species had lost colony worlds. That was 60 years ago. The ceasefire had held since then, technically. Technically. Where is Relay Station Omicron 4? Commander Okafor asked. Sector 9, Lieutenant Patel said. 14 hours at maximum burn. And where are we now? Sector 9. But, Patel paused. Commander, we're 3 hours from Omicron 4. We might be the closest Council allied vessel to the engagement zone. Okafor looked at the star map. The Keth fleet signature on the display was not small. It was a cluster of contacts so dense it looked, for a moment, like a debris field. Then the scale markers loaded, and Adia's stomach understood what her eyes had already seen. 40 ships, maybe more, with signal scatter. The Meridian was one ship, a patrol corvette, designed for interdiction, search and rescue, customs enforcement. They're heading for Omicron 4. Adia said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out quiet. If they reach it before the Council fleet assembles. The relay station coordinates the defensive grid for this entire sector, Okafor said. If it falls, 6 inhabited systems lose their early warning capability. She was still looking at the display. Her face was still calm. How many people on Omicron 4? 312, Kwok said. He'd pulled it up already. 312. Against 40 Keth warships. The Council emergency protocol was clear. Vessels below a certain combat rating, and the Meridian was well below that rating, were to withdraw to safe corridors. This was policy. This was written down. This was what observers did. Stayed out of the way. Did not create incidents. Did not overreach their probationary standing. Commander Okafor turned to Adia. Weapons status? Adia blinked. Full. We completed resupply at Veth Station 6 days ago. Plasma array is at 91%. There's a phantom fault I haven't cleared yet. Clear it. Commander. Clear it, Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. Adia's hands were already moving. What are we doing? Okafor turned back to the display. The Keth fleet moved across it like something inevitable. We are going to Omicron 4, she said. We are going to tell the station commander they have 300 minutes before that fleet arrives, and we are going to make those 300 minutes count. The protocol says. The protocol, Okafor said, was written by people who had never met us. She opened the ship-wide comm. All hands. This is the commander. Battle stations. We are moving to engage. I want every person on this ship to understand what that means. It means we are choosing this. It is not an order from command. It is not required. It is a choice. Anyone who needs a moment to make peace with it, take it now. She closed the channel. No one moved toward the escape pods. No one even looked at them. Adia cleared the phantom fault on the plasma array in 4 minutes. It turned out to be a loose coupling behind panel 7. Simple. Easy. The kind of thing you fixed and forgot. The Meridian turned toward the dark, where the Keth fleet burned like a cluster of cold stars. 14 hours to the fight. 3 hours to the station. 40 ships waiting. 1 patrol corvette, full of humans who had been told for 43 years that they were observers, heading straight into the thing observers were not supposed to touch. Adia checked her targeting systems, checked them again, thought about the word Marakel. Myth dwellers. The ones who tell themselves stories. She thought, yeah, okay, let's tell one. The Keth did not receive human ships on their sensors with any particular concern. The fleet commander, a being called Grouth 7, which was less a name than a designation indicating this was the 7th Grouth pattern mind in current service, watched the single small contact appear on his forward array and processed it with exactly the attention it merited. 1 ship, human configuration, patrol class, combat rating, negligible. Grouth 7 filed it under irrelevant and returned to the approach vector for Omicron 4. This was the last significant error of his career. Relay Station Omicron 4 was not a military installation. That was the important thing, the thing that most of the Council emergency briefings glossed over with the bureaucratic smoothness of people who found uncomfortable facts easier to manage when they were buried in the middle of long documents. It was a relay station. It relayed signals. It had 2 docking arms, a small operations crew, a cafeteria that served 4 kinds of food badly, and a defensive grid designed to handle exactly the kind of threats a relay station in a quiet sector was expected to handle. Smugglers, debris strikes, equipment malfunctions, the occasional dead ship that needed to be pushed out of the traffic lane. It was not designed to handle 40 Keth warships. Station Commander Vethrisol, a Veth officer with 17 years of quiet postings and 0 combat experience, which was considered a point in her favor during the assignment process, received the Council emergency broadcast at the same time everyone else did. She stood in the operations center and looked at her display and felt the particular kind of terror that comes not from the thing that is happening, but from the complete and total absence of anything in your experience that has prepared you for it. She had 312 people on her station. She had a defensive grid rated for light engagements. She had, according to the transit log, 0 Allied vessels within 14 hours. She opened a channel to her security chief, a gruff Corellian named Breath, and said, "Options." Breath looked at her with the expression of someone who had already done the math and found it cruel. "We can begin evacuation. The personnel transports can move 200 people in the first wave. The second wave. There won't be time for a second wave. Breath was quiet. Shields, she asked, can hold against that fleet for maybe 40 minutes. At the high end. 40 minutes. She looked at the display, looked at the mass of Keth contacts moving through Sector 9 like a slow and certain tide, looked at the scale, looked at the single human patrol vessel that had appeared on the far edge of the display 3 hours ago and had been, for some reason she couldn't explain, moving directly toward the engagement zone instead of away from it. She opened a channel to the human ship. Commander Okafor answered on the first ping. Vethri Sol had met humans before, twice, at council functions. They had seemed like the others, earnest in a way that felt slightly exhausting, prone to asking questions that more experienced species had long since stopped asking, carrying around a general air of enthusiasm that the older civilizations had learned was either charming or dangerous, or both. This human did not look enthusiastic. She looked like someone who had already decided something and was now simply executing the decision. Commander Okafor, Vethri Sol said, you are aware that Council protocol requires vessels of your classification to withdraw to safe corridors. I'm aware, Okafor said. And yet, Okafor agreed. Vethri Sol studied the human's face. There was something in it, a stillness that was not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of someone standing at the edge of something large and having made the choice about whether to jump. What can one patrol corvette do? Vethri Sol asked. She did not mean it as cruelty. She meant it as the only honest question available. We're going to find out, Okafor said. What I need from you right now is everything you have on the Keth fleet's approach vector, formation spacing, and any signal intelligence from the last 6 hours. And I need your complete evacuation capacity and timeline. Vethri Sol blinked. The question was not what she had expected. It was specific, practical. The question of someone who was already planning. She transmitted the data. Okafor looked at it for 30 seconds. Her weapons officer, young, dark-eyed, the kind of focus that meant she was running numbers, was already marking targets on a side display. 200 evacuees in the first wave, Okafor said. You have... How long until the Keth are in weapons range? At current speed, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Your transports, Max, burn to safe distance? 40 minutes. Then you start loading in 10 minutes. Priority. Non-essential personnel first. Children, if any, are on station. Medical. Your ops team stays until the last possible moment. I need your relay array live as long as possible. Okafor paused. Can you broadcast a looping distress signal on all council emergency frequencies? Yes. Do it. Loudest you have. I want every council military asset in 3 sectors to know exactly where you are and what is happening. Vethri Sol found herself nodding before she had decided to. What are you going to do? Okafor looked at her with something that was not quite a smile. I'm going to make 40 ships think twice, she said, or at least slow down long enough for help to arrive. The nearest council military response is 11 hours out. I know. Okafor didn't flinch. Start loading your transports, Commander. The channel closed. Vethri Sol stood in the silence of her operations center and thought about the word Marakel. She had used it herself, once or twice, at council dinners, with the comfortable ease of a word that everyone understood and no one examined. She thought about what she had just seen in that human's face. She picked up her comm and started the evacuation order. The Meridian came at the Keth fleet at an angle. Not straight in, not screaming down the center lane like something heroic and dead. Adia had laid out the approach vector in the hour before they reached combat range, and Okafor had looked at it and said yes. And that was the thing about this ship and this commander. There was no performance of authority, just the work. The angle was specific. It was the angle that put the Meridian between the Keth fleet's optimal weapons arc and the station, without giving the Keth a clean broadside shot at the corvette itself. It threaded between 2 things that couldn't both be true at once. And it worked, because the math was right, and Adia had checked the math 4 times. The Keth noticed them at 40,000 kilometers. Grouth 7's assessment upgraded from irrelevant to minor obstacle. He assigned 2 of his lighter warships to intercept, standard dispersal. A patrol vessel didn't rate more attention than that. The 2 Keth intercept ships were fast, smaller than Keth warships usually ran, built for exactly this, running down light contacts before they became problems. The Meridian did not run. They're expecting us to bolt, Adia said. I know, Okafor said. We're not bolting. No. The intercept ships adjusted their approach when the corvette didn't turn. Grouth 7 marked the contact again. Minor obstacle became unusual behavior. The Meridian fired first. Not at the intercept ships, at the space between the intercept ships and the main fleet. A precise, short, targeted burst from the port plasma array that did no damage to anything but lit up the Keth fleet sensors like a signal flare. I can see you, it said. I am not afraid of you. I am targeting your fleet. The two intercept ships broke apart. Standard combat separation. And in the gap between them, just for a moment, the Meridian had a clear angle on the lead Keth warship. Adia fired. Full charge. The plasma array screamed. The blast crossed the distance in 4 seconds and hit the Keth warship's forward shield array at an angle the Keth engineers had not prioritized, because no small patrol vessel had ever been aggressive enough to try this vector, and shield arrays are designed around the threats you have faced, not the ones you haven't thought of yet. The forward shield failed. Not fully. Not catastrophically, but enough. The lead Keth warship's forward sensors went dark. It broke formation to compensate. When a lead ship breaks formation, the ships behind it have to adjust. It is physics. It is also the way you turn 40 ships into a problem for themselves. Grouth 7 upgraded his assessment to threat. He reassigned 8 ships to the intercept. 8. For 1 patrol corvette. On the station, Vethrisol was watching the tactical display with her operations chief, a Cerelian named Tev who had not slept in 2 days, and was running on stimulant T and professional obligation. Tev watched the Meridian's dot dance across the display, darting, pulling, firing, drawing ships away from the approach vector like a dog herding something 5 times its size. It's not going to work, Tev said, not cruelly, just honestly. 1 ship, it can't sustain. The first transport is away, Vethrisol said quietly. That's 60 people. Tev was quiet. It doesn't have to win, she said. It just has to buy minutes. On the display, the Meridian was buying them. Inside the Meridian, the reality of what they were doing was very loud and very physical. Combat at this scale meant the ship moved in ways that weren't comfortable. Hard burns, lateral slides. The moment when the Keth plasma shot came close enough that the shockwave rocked the hull and Ensign Kwok hit his head on the console and swore in 3 languages while keeping his hands on the navigation controls. Hull integrity? Okafor called. 93%, someone answered. That was a near miss on the... Another hit. This one real. Adia felt it in her teeth before she heard the alarm. The ship bucked. The lights flickered. The port plasma array threw an error she recognized. Not the phantom fault from before. Something real this time. A power coupling that had been stressed past its tolerance. Array's at 60%, she said. I can get it back up, but I need 4 minutes. You have 2, Okafor said. Then I'll be impressive. She went, not running. Running on a ship in combat was how you got thrown into walls. She moved fast and sure through the corridor to the engineering access panel, pulled it open, found the coupling, found the problem, found the secondary coupling, and started working. The ship shook again. She kept working. The thing about fixing things under pressure was that the pressure either made your hands stupid or made your hands very smart. Adia's hands had always, since she was a child, taking apart broken equipment in her mother's repair shop in Accra, been very smart under pressure. They moved with a memory that didn't need her brain's permission. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Array's back, she called into her comm. Good, Okafor said, because we have a new problem. Adia moved back to the bridge. On the main display, Grouth 7 had split his fleet. 20 ships continuing toward the station. 20 ships turning toward the Meridian. It was the move of someone who had stopped treating the patrol corvette as a nuisance and started treating it as something that needed to be dealt with completely. It was, in the strange ledger of combat, a kind of compliment. It was also a death sentence. 20 Keth warships against 1 corvette was not a fight. It was an execution timeline. Options, Okafor said. Patel ran the numbers. We can run. They'll pursue, but we can keep them busy for another. If we run, the 20 going for the station don't have anything to chase them. They reach Omicron 4 at full speed. Okafor shook her head. Second evacuation transport? Loaded and ready, Kwok said. Station is saying another 30 minutes before it can launch. Mechanical issue with the docking arm release. 30 minutes. 20 Keth warships incoming. We stay, Okafor said. No one argued. Adia looked at her weapons board. 60% on the array. Full missile complement. 16 ship-to-ship missiles, not designed for targets this large but capable of being annoying, which at this point was the goal. ECM suite full. A handful of other tricks that weren't in the standard armament catalog but were in the Meridians because Commander Okafor had, over 6 years, developed a habit of requesting equipment that technically wasn't on the standard loadout list and had never once been told no, possibly because no one had expected her to actually need any of it. The decoy array, Adia said. Okafor looked at her. We have 6 decoy drones. They're rated for short-range sensor spoofing. They make us look like 6 ships to anything that isn't doing tight beam scanning. Adia pulled up the specs. At this range, Keth sensors are using wideband sweep. They won't go tight beam until they're in close. 6 drones, Okafor said, against 20 ships. Against 20 ships that think they're looking at 7. Okafor was quiet for 4 seconds. Do it. The decoys launched. The Meridian sensor ghost multiplied across the Keth displays. 7 contacts, spread wide, moving with the unpredictable variance that real ships moved with because the drones were programmed to emulate engine flutter and course corrections and all the small imprecisions of real piloting. Grouth 7 looked at his display. 7 human ships. He had been tracking 1. For the first time in this engagement, the Keth fleet commander felt the edge of something that was not quite concern but was in the same family. He ordered his ships to fan wider, to cover the spread, to not let any of the 7 contacts flank. Fanning wider meant fanning slower. Slower meant more minutes. More minutes meant one more thing loaded onto a transport. One more person in a seat. One more person alive. On the station, the second transport launched. Vethrisol watched it go, and then looked back at the Meridian signal on her display, and felt something she didn't have a name for yet. It was the feeling of watching something that shouldn't be possible, refusing to accept that fact. Tev, beside her, said nothing for a long time. Then he said, I owe someone an apology. Who? Everyone I ever called Marakel, he said. I don't think I knew what it meant. The thing about space combat that the entertainment programs never got right was the silence between things. Not silence in the literal sense. The Meridian was full of noise, the hum of the reactor running at maximum output, the cycling sound of the plasma array cooling between shots, the constant chatter of status updates, the sharp percussion of minor hull impacts from debris the Keth fleet was kicking up as it moved. All of that was constant. All of that was background. The silence was in the gaps between decisions. You made a choice. You executed the choice. And then there was a window, sometimes 4 seconds, sometimes 40, where everything was already in motion, and you couldn't change it, and you just had to wait to find out if you were right. Commander Sarah Okafor had spent the last 70 minutes living inside those gaps. She was good at it. She had always been good at waiting. It was a thing about her that people found unsettling until they worked with her for long enough to understand that it wasn't coldness. It was the opposite of coldness. It was care, compressed down until it was dense enough to be still. Right now, she was watching 20 Keth warships move through the decoy field and running the math in her head that she already knew the answer to. The decoys had bought 17 minutes. The Keth had figured out the spoofing pattern. She'd known they would. They weren't stupid. They were just slow to update. And slow was what she'd needed. And they'd collapsed back into a tighter formation and resumed their approach. But 17 minutes was 17 minutes. The third transport had launched from Omicron 4. 210 people gone. 102 people still on the station. The Keth fleet was 30 minutes from weapons range of the station. The Meridian was between them. Talk to me about the missile spread, Okafor said. Adia pulled it up. If we fire all 16 in a single spread, we can saturate their point defense for approximately 90 seconds. During that 90 seconds, they'll be too busy shooting down missiles to shoot at us with any kind of accuracy. What do we do with 90 seconds? We close the distance. We get inside their formation. Patel looked over from navigation. Inside their formation? Their warships are built for long-range combat, Adia said. Their close-quarters weapons are lighter, shorter range. If we're inside their formation, they can't bring their main guns to bear without hitting each other. Patel absorbed this. We'd be in the middle of 20 Keth warships. Yes. We'd have no room to maneuver. We'd have no need to. If they want to shoot us, They have to maneuver, and if they maneuver badly, they create crossfire problems. Wadia's voice was steady. Not because she wasn't scared, because the math was what it was, and pretending otherwise didn't help the math. It's a bad idea. It's just the least bad idea available. Okafor looked at her for a moment. You did the numbers on this. I did the numbers on everything, Adia said. That was the best one. What's our survival probability? Adia was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, not performing hesitation, just being honest about what the honesty cost her. Meaningfully non-zero, she said. Okafor turned back to the display. Fire the spread, she said, then take us in. The missile spread was a noise and a light on the Keth sensors that demanded immediate response. 16 missiles were not enough to threaten a Keth warship. The Keth point defense systems were designed to handle salvos from capital ships. Hundreds of projectiles, waves of fire. 16 missiles was a minor annoyance in the arithmetic of Keth warfare. But the Keth were methodical. They were systematic. They had protocols, and their protocols said that incoming weapons got shot down before you looked at anything else. It was good practice. It had served them across 800 years of conquest. So for 91 seconds, every Keth point defense battery was firing. The Meridian moved. It moved fast, faster than a Corvette had any business moving. Because Quock was burning the main drive at 112% of rated output, which was technically fine because the rated output had a safety margin built in that Okafor had quietly noted 6 years ago and had been quietly aware of ever since. 40,000 kilometers became 20,000, 20 became 10, 10 became 2. The Keth saw what was happening. Grouth 7 saw what was happening and felt something very unusual, a sensation his species called Valgreth, which translated roughly as encountering a thing that should not be possible and finding it is. He ordered his ships to break formation. He ordered weapons to switch targets. 6 different Keth captains gave 6 different orders in the same 4-second window. 2 of them contradicted each other. One Keth warship turned into the path of another Keth warship. The collision was glancing, both ships' shields held, but both ships lost speed and their weapon systems cycled down for 2 seconds as the power rerouted. The Meridian was inside the formation. It was not comfortable. The Keth ships surrounded them at distances that, on the tactical display, looked like being inside a closing fist. Adia fired the plasma array in 3-second bursts, rotating targets, not trying to destroy anything, just keeping every nearby Keth captain uncertain about which direction the next shot was coming from. Moving targets didn't shoot back as accurately. Uncertain captains didn't coordinate as smoothly. A Keth shot hit the Meridian's starboard shield. Hull integrity dropped to 78%. Another hit, 69. Engine room is reporting overheat on the secondary drive, someone called out. Keep it running, Okafor said. Commander, at this output, keep it running. 69% hull integrity, inside a formation of 20 Keth warships. 17 crew members were running damage control across 5 different decks. Ensign Quock was holding the ship in a microdrift pattern that shouldn't have been possible in this traffic density, weaving between the positions of ships 3 times the Meridian's size. He'd grown up doing this. Not in warships. In the fishing boat lanes off the Korean coast, where his grandfather had taught him to thread between freighters and tankers in a small traditional boat without getting run over. The principle was the same. The scale was different. The fear was identical. Adia fired again, hit a Keth weapons array. The ship it belonged to pulled back. One ship pulling back created a gap. A gap gave Quock room to move. Room to move meant Adia had new angles. The math was ugly, but it wasn't zero. It was not zero. On the station, the 4th transport was loading. Vethrisol had stopped looking at the transport count and started watching the tactical display with the kind of focus that had nothing practical in it anymore. The practical things were being handled. Her people were working. The evacuation was moving. She was watching because she couldn't stop watching. The Meridian's signal was inside the Keth formation, a single small point surrounded by 20 larger points. Moving, still firing. Tev stood beside her. He had long since stopped pretending to do anything except watch. How are they doing that? He asked. Not rhetorically. He genuinely did not understand. I don't know, Vethrisol said. They should be dead. I know. No, I mean, Tev struggled with something. He was Sorelian, which meant he was precise, which meant he had difficulty with things that didn't fit his precision. I've reviewed combat logs for 100 engagements in my career. I know what one vessel against 20 looks like. It looks like a brief entry in an after-action report. It does not look like this. Vethrisol said nothing. What are they doing that is different? Tev asked. Vethrisol looked at the display, at the Meridian signal still moving inside that ring of enemies, still alive, 38 minutes into what should have been a 2-minute encounter at most. I think, she said slowly, they decided the math was wrong. The math isn't wrong. Their math is different, she said. We calculate what we're likely to survive. I think they calculate what they're willing to lose. Tev stared at her. It's not the same thing, she said. He looked back at the display. No, he said finally. It isn't. The message came at the 40-minute mark. Not from command, not from the council, from the Keth. Grouth 7 opened a channel to the Meridian on a broad-spectrum hail. His translator worked across most council languages. He had not expected to need it for this engagement. Okafor answered. Grouth 7 looked at the human on his screen. She looked back at him. Neither of them seemed interested in performing anything. You are one ship, Grouth 7 said. Yes, Okafor said. Your damage is significant. You cannot sustain your current engagement. Probably not, she agreed. Why are you still here? Okafor tilted her head. Just slightly. How many ships do you have left on the station approach vector? A pause. Grouth 7 was not accustomed to being questioned in return. He processed the question and then, because he was not, whatever else he was, stupid, he chose honesty. 12, he said. He had pulled 8 back to deal with the Meridian, then 12, then 16. Now he had 4 ships. 4. Still heading for the station. And 20 minutes ago he had realized that the math was changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Your station raid requires a certain force minimum to be effective, Okafor said. 4 ships isn't your minimum. Grouth 7 was quiet. My people are not going to stop, Okafor said. You can destroy this ship, probably, with what it's going to cost you, and then you'll have 4 ships left and a station that has been evacuating for, she checked, 53 minutes. There won't be enough people left on that station to justify what you've spent today. You are telling me to withdraw, Grouth 7 said. I'm telling you the math, she said. Grouth 7 looked at this human, at this one ship, still moving inside his formation, still firing, still burning its engine past safe limits, crewed by 40 people, who should have been dead 30 minutes ago. He thought about Valgrith. He thought about what it meant to encounter a thing that should not be possible. If I withdraw today, he said, we will come back. I know, Okafor said. Bring more ships. She closed the channel. Ayaya looked at her commander and said nothing, which was the right choice. Okafor turned back to the display. Keep formation pressure. Don't give them room to reinforce the station approach. Yes, ma'am. The Keth fleet did not withdraw. Not immediately. Grouth 7 was not the kind of commander who made decisions in emotion. He watched his formation. He watched his damage reports. He watched the 4 ships heading toward the station, which now showed, according to the relay station's own broadcast, an 80% evacuated personnel status. He did the math. The math was the math. At the 51-minute mark, the 4 station approach ships turned back. At the 54-minute mark, the main fleet began to disengage. Not routed, not broken. Choosing. The difference mattered. And Grouth 7 was careful to ensure the withdrawal looked like a choice, because a choice could be explained, and an explanation could preserve something. The Meridian let them go. Okafor did not pursue. She had no illusions about what pursuit would accomplish, and she wasn't interested in winning stories. She was interested in the station. Hull integrity? She asked. 51%, came the answer. Casualties. 3 wounded. Ensign Marcus has a broken arm. He was in the port corridor when we took that hit at the 30-minute mark. Ko and Ose. The voice paused. Adia's fine. She's still at the weapons board. I can hear you, Adia said, without turning around. I'm fine. Heading? Quack asked. Omicron 4, Okafor said. Let's see who's left. Vethrisol was on the station when the Meridian docked. She had stayed. She had put herself on the last group, the ops crew, as the Meridian had told her, the essential people who kept the systems running until the last possible moment. There were 22 of them left. The fourth transport had taken everyone else. The Keth had withdrawn. The station was intact. She stood in the docking bay and watched the Meridian's airlock open and Commander Okafor walk out with the particular gait of someone who was extremely tired and was not going to let that be visible in anything except the slight stiffness around the eyes. Vethrisol had prepared something to say, something formal, something appropriate. She had been trying to find the right words for the last 20 minutes. She abandoned them when she saw the commander's face. Instead, she said, 290 people. Okafor looked at her. That's how many made it out, Vethrisol said. 290 people are on those transports right now. She stopped. Something in her chest was doing something she was not going to identify or name in public. Because we stayed, Okafor said. Simply, not proud, not deflecting, just accurate. Vethrisol looked at the Meridian behind her, at the scorch marks on the hull, at the places where the armor plating had deformed under impact and been held together by, she didn't know what, engineering, stubbornness, the same math that wasn't the same math. Can I ask you something? Vethrisol said. Yes. Why did you come? The protocol was clear. You were not required. You were, in fact, specifically told not to engage. Okafor was quiet for a moment. There were 300 people on your station, she said, and we were the closest ship. That's not a reason by council standards. That's not even a reason by most military standards. You were outclassed by orders of magnitude. The rational. I know what the rational choice was, Okafor said. We made a different one. Vethrisol stared at her. You made a different one, she repeated. Yes. And your crew. They agreed. They didn't have to agree. I gave them the choice. And 40 people chose to go into that. 40 people, Okafor said, decided that 300 strangers were worth the risk. She paused. I don't think that's complicated. I think that's just... She searched for the word, us. Vethrisol stood in the docking bay for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, to no one in particular, mostly to herself, We have been calling you Marakel for 40 years. I know, Okafor said. We did not mean it as a compliment. I know that too. Vethrisol looked at her, at the damaged ship behind her, at the 40 people who had chosen this. I think, she said carefully, we may have been wrong about what it meant. The council emergency session was convened 48 hours after the Keth withdrawal. It was the fastest the council had convened for anything in 60 years. The previous record had been set by the Marhan incident, which had resulted in the current Keth ceasefire, and had also, incidentally, been the last time anyone had seriously tested what happened when you pushed the Keth hard enough that they decided pulling back was better than continuing. Humans had now done that. With one ship. The session chamber was different from normal council sessions, which were themselves already overwhelming, circular, tiered, designed to make every species feel simultaneously observed and observing, which was either brilliant diplomacy or architectural anxiety, depending on how you thought about it. Emergency sessions were held in a smaller room. The tiers were steeper. The lighting was cooler. It felt more like what it was, a room where serious people came to deal with serious things. Commander Sarah Okafor attended as a witness. She had been transported to Council Station from Omicron 4 in a Veth shuttle. The Meridian was in too poor a shape for anything beyond minimal station keeping, and she sat in the observer's gallery in clean clothes that someone had found for her, because her own uniform had taken enough of the Meridian's trouble to need washing in a way that washing didn't quite cover. She had slept for 8 hours on the transport. This was not enough sleep. This was the sleep available, so she took it. The observer's gallery was full in a way she had never seen it. Usually the human section of the observer gallery held 2 or 3 diplomatic staff, politely present and carefully invisible. Today it held the full human diplomatic mission, 6 people, plus every human crew member from the Meridian who could walk. They sat in their section and looked at the chamber and said nothing. Adia OC sat 2 rows back from Okafor. Her arm was in a temporary brace, not Marcus's broken arm. Marcus was still on medical rest. But Adia had taken a knock to her forearm against the weapons console during one of the harder impacts that she had not mentioned to anyone, including medical, until after the Keth withdrew, at which point the medic had given her a look that contained an entire lecture, and she had accepted it without comment. The council session opened with the standard Droon invocation, which was 900 years old and took 4 minutes, and was in a Droon dialect that most universal translators handled poorly. Then Orath Velsen, who was still the Droon elder and was therefore still in the chair, called the session to order. The council notes the actions of the UES Meridian in Sector 9, Orath Velsen said. We note that these actions were taken in direct contravention of Council Emergency Protocol for vessels of the Meridian's classification. We note that these actions resulted in the withdrawal of a Keth offensive fleet. We note that 290 people who would otherwise be dead or captured are alive. We are here to determine the appropriate response. She looked up from her notes. She looked at the human section of the observer gallery. Commander Okafor, she said, you may address the council. Okafor walked to the speaker's floor. She did not prepare herself visibly. She did not arrange her face or straighten her posture, or do any of the things that people who are performing confidence do when they want to look confident. She just walked there and stood there. I broke the protocol, she said. I want to say that clearly, because I understand you're going to have to decide what to do about that, and you should make that decision based on accurate information. I violated the Emergency Response Directive for vessels of my class. I did so intentionally, after reading the directive. Silence. I also want to say, she continued, that I would do it again. More silence. A different kind. Not because I don't respect the Council's procedures. I do. They exist for good reasons. But those procedures were written assuming a specific thing about how humans respond to certain situations, and I think that assumption was wrong. Orath Velsen looked at her. What assumption? That we would calculate survival probability and act accordingly, Okafor said. The protocol assumes that a small vessel in an impossible situation will prioritize its own survival. It's a reasonable assumption for most cases. For us, she paused. Not for drama, because she was choosing words carefully. We were taught, a long time ago, that there are things worth dying for. Not in an abstract way, in a specific way. 300 people on a station was specific enough. The chamber was very quiet. I'm not saying we're better than other species, Okafor said. I don't think that. I think we just calculate things differently sometimes. What looks like a 0 to someone else looks like a small positive number to us, and small positive numbers are worth trying. She stopped speaking. Orath Velsen looked at her for a long moment. In 900 years of life, the Droon elder had heard thousands of speeches in this chamber. She had heard brilliance and foolishness and cowardice, dressed as wisdom, and wisdom that looked like foolishness, until it wasn't. She had developed a reliable internal sensor for the difference. This was not a speech. This was a woman explaining herself accurately. You may return to the gallery, Orath Velsen said. Okafor returned. The debate lasted 4 hours. There were those who wanted to censure the Meridian's action. The Cerelian Compact's representative, a careful diplomat named Verith, made the argument that protocol existed to prevent exactly this kind of improvisation, that one favorable outcome didn't validate the risk, that if every small vessel captain decided individually to violate emergency protocols based on personal moral calculus, the entire emergency response system would collapse. It was a good argument, clean and logical. The Veth representative, who was not Tessevar but was someone who had served with Tessevar and had absorbed certain habits, countered that the protocol had been designed for a universe in which species behaved predictably, and that the relevant question was not whether the protocol had been violated, but whether the protocol's violation had served its underlying purpose, which was the preservation of life. The Droon said very little for most of 4 hours. Orath Velsen sat in her chair and listened, and occasionally asked clarifying questions, and said nothing about her own view. At the 3.5-hour mark, a Veth admiral named Krell, who commanded the sector defense fleet, and who had arrived at Omicron 4 6 hours after the Keth withdrawal, asked to be recognized. I reviewed the engagement logs, Krell said, in detail. 300 hours of review in the last 48 hours. Your conclusion? Orath Velsen asked. My conclusion, Krell said, is that I do not fully understand what I was watching. He paused. I have 40 years of experience in fleet combat. I can identify the tactics they used. I understand each individual decision. What I cannot explain is the aggregate of it, the pattern, the willingness to absorb damage that should have been fatal and keep functioning, the improvisation, He stopped. There is a word in Veth for what happens when a calculation produces a result you cannot explain. Savanthal, someone said. Yes, the math that is correct but feels wrong. He looked toward the human gallery. Their math felt wrong, but it worked. Orith Velsen let the silence sit for a moment. The Council, she said, has an existing framework for recognizing extraordinary service by non-member entities. It has been used 11 times in Council history. I am going to propose that it be used here. The recognition ceremony was small by Council standards, which meant it was enormous by human standards. Adia Ose stood at the edge of the formal reception area after the official part was done and watched alien dignitaries from 30 species navigate the space around the human delegation. The reception had that specific texture of events where important things had just happened, and everyone was still working out what to feel about them. A Veth diplomat came to stand beside her. Young for a Veth, probably only 40 or 50. He looked at the room the way someone looks at a thing they expected to understand, and found they didn't. "Can I ask you something?" he said. His translator gave him good English, almost accent-free, with a slight flattening of certain vowels. "Sure," Adia said. "What were you thinking during the engagement?" Adia considered the question. It was genuine. "Mostly math," she said. "Weapons solutions, hull integrity, the things that needed doing." But underneath that, she thought about it. About the 40 minutes inside the Keth formation. About the moment when the hull integrity hit 59%, and she had thought, not in words but in the clear wordless language of the body, we might actually die here. "I was thinking about the people on the station," she said. I kept running the count. 60 on the first transport, then 120, then 180. She tried to find words for it. As long as the number was going up, it meant the thing we were doing was working. So every time I looked at the count going up, it was, she paused. It helped. The Veth diplomat was quiet for a moment. The count of people saved. "Yeah. You were tracking it during combat." "Yeah." He looked at her. "Why does that matter so much?" Adia looked back at him. The question wasn't hostile. It was the question of someone from a species that had spent 10,000 years being told the galaxy was what it was. That strength ate, weakness negotiated, survival was the only real logic, genuinely trying to understand a different way of running the numbers. "Because," she said, "if we don't track the people who make it out, what are we doing this for?" The Veth diplomat didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I am going to have to think about that." "Take your time," Adia said. The formal outcome of the council session was 3 things. First, the Meridian's action was officially designated a recognized act of exceptional service, the 12th in council history. Second, the human protocol classification was amended. Vessels under human command were reclassified for emergency response purposes, removing the automatic withdrawal directive for patrol-class vessels and replacing it with commander's discretion, which was, in practical terms, the council writing into official policy that humans could not reliably be expected to follow the math that said stand down, and that this might sometimes be useful. Third, and this was the one that took everyone, including the human diplomatic mission, by surprise, Orith Velsen proposed and the council passed, by a margin of 26-6, a formal invitation for the United Earth Systems to begin the full membership evaluation process. Not observers. Evaluating for members. The process would take years. There were criteria, committees, hearings. The Droon did not move quickly on anything that would still be relevant in a century. But the door, which had been politely and firmly closed for 43 years, was open. Carla Yuen, who was still the lead human diplomat because she had been doing this for 20 years and was irreplaceable and knew it in the quiet way that capable people know things, received the news in her office on Council Station. She had served here for 12 years. She knew every corridor, every procedure, every unofficial channel. She had spent those 12 years in the gentle, permanent frustration of competent people who are handed half the tools they need and told to build anyway. She sat at her desk and read the formal notification twice. Then she opened her personal comm and called Dr. Rajan Mehta, who was old now and retired and living in Bangalore with his grandchildren and his telescope. He answered on the 3rd ring. It was late in Bangalore. "Carla," he said. He could read something in her face. He had always been able to read things in faces. "What happened?" "We're in," she said. A pause. "The full process?" The full process. Another pause. Longer. One ship did that? He asked. One ship, she said. 40 people. 54 minutes. Mehta was quiet for a long time. Outside his window, Bangalore was loud with nighttime in the way that Indian cities were loud, layered, alive, not distinguishing between night and everything else because the city did not really believe in the distinction. Carla, he said, do you remember what I said on the transport to the first meeting? 43 years ago? She didn't remember exactly, but she knew the shape of the conversation. Something about stories, she said. I said, what if the advantage isn't the technology? What if the advantage is that we're the only species that still believes it can end differently than it started? I remember now. I was right, he said. He said it like a man who had been waiting a long time to say it, and was surprised to find that it felt smaller than expected, quieter, more private. The right things often did. You were right, Carla said. How's the crew? He asked. She looked at her notifications. At the damage report from the Meridian, at the crew roster, at the 51% hull integrity that a patrol corvette should never survive, at 40 names, all present, all breathing. Alive, she said. All 40 of them. Alive. Mehta exhaled. Good, he said. That's good. Outside his window, Bangalore was loud. Inside the council station, Carla Ewan sat with her notification and her history, and the particular feeling of a door opening after a long time of knowing it was there. She thought about what Okafor had said in the chamber. Small positive numbers are worth trying, she thought. Yes, they are. The Keth returned 8 months later. They came with more ships. Not because Grouth 7 had told them to. Grouth 7 had filed a combat report that was notable in Keth military record-keeping for being the first after-action document in 400 years to include the phrase enemy behavior not within modeled parameters. He had recommended a period of intelligence gathering before re-engagement. This was considered, by Keth standards, wisdom. The Keth who came back were not following his advice. They were following something older, the logic that said, you were stopped by one small ship. There are many ways to interpret that. The wrong interpretation was that the small ship had been lucky. The right interpretation was that you had failed to commit enough force. The solution to not committing enough force was simple arithmetic. They came with 80 ships, across 3 separate breach points in Sector 7, entering simultaneously, in a coordination that was, even for their enemies, impressive. You had to respect the logistics of it. 800 years of practice showed. The Council military response this time was ready. Partially. Ready was doing some work in that sentence. The emergency had closed one of the primary gaps. Omicron 4 had been reinforced, and the defensive grid was back online. The sector defense fleet had been repositioned closer to the historical breach vectors. Intelligence had gotten better, not good. Better. But 80 ships across 3 points was a serious commitment. The Keth were done testing. They had decided the ceasefire was over, and when the Keth decided something in that register, they said it with ships. Commander Okafor got the alert at 0347 station time. She had been asleep. She had been sleeping reasonably well for 2 months, which was not always the case after combat, but which she credited to having gotten past the specific thing that usually caused the poor sleep after combat, which was the open question of whether you had made the right choices. That question had been answered. The sleep had come back. She was in the operations center of UES Station 7. She had been posted there during the Meridian's repair period, a 3-month assignment to sector coordination that she had expected to find frustrating and had instead found useful, when the breach alerts came in. 3 points, simultaneous. She looked at the display the way she looked at all displays, which was with the specific attention of someone who wasn't looking at the display but threw it at the thing the display represented. Get me Admiral Krell, she said. Admiral Krell was Veth. He commanded the sector defense fleet. He was 62 years old, which for a Veth was vigorous middle age, and he had the particular gravitas of someone who had spent 40 years doing the hardest things the job required, without ever appearing to be working hard at them. He had reviewed the Meridian engagement logs 300 hours after the fact. He had said so in the council session. He had not, at that point, mentioned everything those 300 hours of review had produced, because the council session had not been the right venue. He thought about it a lot, though. He thought about the moment in the logs when the Meridian fired all 16 missiles in one spread, and then drove directly into the Keth formation. He had analyzed that decision 14 times. Each time, the analysis came back the same way. It was the correct choice given the information available, the constraints on the ship, and the goal. It was correct. What he couldn't model was the decision process that produced it. His own tactical training, and the training of every Veth officer he had ever worked with, was built on what you call sequential risk assessment. You evaluated threats, calculated survival probability, assigned resources proportional to probability of success. It was a good system. It had kept the Veth fleet effective for 800 years. The Meridian had done something else. He had spent 300 hours trying to name it, and had settled, finally, on this. They had decided the outcome first, and then worked backward to find out how to get there. They had said those people will be alive and then figured out what that required, instead of saying here is what is likely possible and optimizing within that. It was a subtle difference. It produced wildly different behaviors under pressure. He had written a private memo about it that he had not sent to anyone. When Okafor appeared on his comm at 0349, he looked at her and felt the particular sensation of someone whose private thoughts have become suddenly relevant. "Admiral," Okafor said, "3 breach points. I see them. 80 ships. I see them. You're splitting your fleet to respond. That is standard doctrine for a 3-point incursion." "I know," she said. "I want to talk about the middle breach point." Krell looked at his display. The middle breach point, Sector 7.2, was the central prong of the Keth offensive, and it was pointed directly at the Droon colony world of Severtal Osh. 18 ships through that breach point. The Droon were not a military species. They were the oldest, the most philosophically developed, the most respected. They were not fighters. They were thinkers. "What about it?" Krell asked. "The Droon colony is the real target," Okafor said. "The other 2 breach points are pressure. They're designed to divide your fleet response. The middle point is where they're going." Krell had reached the same conclusion 90 seconds ago. "Yes." "How long until your main fleet elements can reach point 2? 47 minutes at maximum burn. And the Keth? 28 minutes to weapons range of the colony." Krell said nothing. The math was clear and brutal. "I need 3 things," Okafor said. "I need the Meridian, which is at 94% operational as of yesterday's report. I need authorization to take her to point 2 ahead of the main fleet, and I need you to send me everything you have on the Keth formation at point 2. Spacing, approach vector, shield harmonics if intelligence has them." Krell looked at her. "The Meridian is a corvette," he said. "I know what the Meridian is. 18 Keth warships. 8 months ago it was 20. Krell was quiet for a long moment. "Last time," he said carefully, "you had a station to protect and people to evacuate. You had a defined objective and a time horizon. What is your objective this time?" "Buy you 20 minutes," she said. "Long enough for your fleet to get there. 20 minutes against 18 Keth warships." "I've been thinking about this for 8 months, Okafor said. "I've run simulations. I've looked at the Keth approach patterns from last time, from the historical engagement logs, from everything your intelligence division shared with us during the review process. I have a plan." Krell looked at her. He thought about his memo that he had not sent to anyone, about the difference between deciding what is likely possible and deciding what the outcome will be. He thought about what Adia Ose had told the young diplomat at the reception. As long as the number was going up, it meant the thing we were doing was working. "Send me the plan," he said. She sent it in 40 seconds. He read it in 3 minutes. It was not the plan of someone who had calculated survival probability. It was the plan of someone who had decided 18 Keth warships were going to be too busy and too confused and too concerned with the small, bright, angry thing in front of them to reach a colony world for 20 minutes, and had then worked backward from that decision to find every available tool for making it true. The math said it was possible. The math also said it was barely possible. He sent the authorization. The Meridian launched from Station 7 at 0407. Okafor had her crew at battle stations before the authorization cleared. This was technically a procedural violation. She would deal with that later. Adia Ose was at the weapons board. Her arm was fully healed. She had spent the 3 months of the Meridian's repair running simulations on the station's combat training systems, which were better than the ship's own systems, and had developed 7 new targeting solutions for close formation combat against larger vessels. She had written them up and submitted them to the Human Naval Engineering Board, who had thanked her very politely, and she was fairly sure had not read them yet. She had them memorized. Kwok was at navigation. He had spent the repair period visiting his grandfather in Korea for 2 weeks, and then returning and promptly getting into an argument with the station's senior navigator about approach vector efficiency that had, by the time it was resolved, resulted in Kwok being invited to co-author a paper on high-density traffic navigation, which he had agreed to, and then forgotten about because things had gotten busy. The crew of the Meridian came back to their ship with the specific comfort of people returning to something they already knew how to be. 18 ships, Kwok said, looking at the display. Last time it was 20. Last time we had more missiles, Adia said. We only got restocked to 12. Details. I like details. The Meridian crossed into Sector 7 at 0441. What happened next took 22 minutes. It was written about afterward in more documents than any single engagement in the previous century of Council military history. It was studied. It was debated. The Veth Naval College included it in their curriculum. The Sorelian Military Academy made it a required case study. The Droon, who wrote about everything with the patience of the very old, produced an analysis in 14 volumes that took 6 years to complete, and concluded, in its final chapter, that what the Meridian had done was not correctly described as tactics. It was described, in the Droon text, as Jeth Orville, a word that translated imperfectly as refusing to accept the space between what is and what should be. During those 22 minutes, the Meridian engaged the 18-ship Keth formation at Point 2, with a combination of direct weapons fire, the 7 new close formation targeting solutions that Adia had developed and that had never been used in actual combat before this moment, a decoy dispersal pattern that Okafor had designed specifically for larger formation groups based on analysis of the first engagement, and a navigational approach from Kwok that, when the Veth analysts reviewed it, was described in the official report as not conventionally achievable, and then footnoted with, "We have revised our models." The Meridian took significant damage. Hull integrity reached 31% before the main fleet arrived. 2 crew members were seriously wounded. 12 had minor injuries. The ship's secondary reactor went offline at the 14-minute mark and came back online at the 16-minute mark because the chief engineer, a stocky woman named Vasquez who had been with the ship for 4 years and had the specific relationship with the Meridian systems that comes from long familiarity, rerouted power through 3 alternative channels in 2 minutes and 15 seconds while the ship was actively under fire. The Keth formation, which had expected to encounter no resistance for 28 minutes, and had then encountered fierce resistance immediately, could not reach the colony world. At the 22-minute mark, Admiral Krell's fleet arrived. The engagement that followed was large and loud and decisive in the way that engagements are decisive when one side has prepared and the other has been delayed long enough that its advantage of surprise is gone. The Keth fought hard. They were built for fighting, but the calculus had shifted, and after 40 minutes of engagement that cost both sides, the Keth withdrew. All 3 breach points. In the post-engagement silence, Krell opened a channel to the Meridian. Okafor answered from the bridge of her ship, which had 31% hull integrity and smelled of ozone and scorched insulation. 22 minutes, Krell said. You needed 20, she said. You gave us 22. A margin. Krell was quiet for a moment. In 40 years of commanding Veth naval forces, he had cultivated the ability to hold silence without it becoming uncomfortable. He used it now to hold something that was not easily said and needed the space. I am going to recommend, he said, that the Council establish a joint human Veth rapid response unit, small vessels, human command protocols, Veth support infrastructure, based on what happened at Omicron 4 and what happened today. Okafor looked at him. The Council will debate that for years. Probably, Krell said. I am going to recommend it anyway. She said nothing. Is your crew intact? He asked. Too serious. The rest operational. And you? She considered the question. She was very tired. She was also, underneath the tiredness, something she would have had difficulty naming exactly. Not relief, because relief implied she had been afraid, and the fear had been present but secondary to the work. Something more like the feeling of a thing accomplished, a problem that had been a problem and was now less of a problem. I'm fine, she said. The Droon colony of Severtal Osh was home to 11,000 people. After the battle, the colony sent a message to the Meridian, not through official channels. Not a formal statement, a direct message, signed by the colony's eldest resident, a Droon named Oreth Velmarin, who was 1,200 years old and had lived through the last Keth offensive 60 years ago. The message said, "We have a word for you in Old Droon. The language is no longer widely spoken. The word is Kethmaval. It means, the ones who arrive when they should not be able to arrive. We called your species Marakel for many years. The myth dwellers, the ones who tell themselves stories. I am 1,200 years old. In 1,200 years, I have learned that there is a difference between a story and a lie. A lie is a thing you tell yourself about the present. A story is a thing you tell yourself about what the future could be. We told ourselves the galaxy was what it was. We told ourselves that the math was the math. We have been telling ourselves this for 10,000 years, and it has not made us safe. It has made us correct. You tell yourselves you can arrive in time. You tell yourselves that one ship is enough. You tell yourselves the number will keep going up, and then you make it true. This is not naivety. We were wrong about what we were calling naive. I do not know what to call it correctly. I am 1,200 years old and I am still learning. Thank you," the message ended. Okafor read it in her quarters during the transit back to the station. She read it once and then sat with it for a while. Outside the viewport, Sector 7 moved past, the ordinary dark and scattered light of space, which looked peaceful from inside and was not. She thought about what Oreth Velmarin had said, about stories versus lies. She thought about a species that had decided, somewhere in its ancient history, that the galaxy was what it was, and had been right about that in every particular, and had never quite worked out that being right was not the same as being safe. She thought about 40 people on a patrol corvette who had looked at 20 Keth warships and thought, in whatever wordless language the body uses to make its real decisions, the number should keep going up. She thought about Adia Ose at the weapons board tracking the evacuation count like a lifeline. 60, 120, 180, 210. The number going up. She pulled out her crew duty log, the physical one, kept by hand, because she had started keeping it that way 6 years ago, when the station computer on her first posting had failed mid-mission, and she had decided she didn't want to depend on a system she couldn't hold in her hands. The log recorded every mission, every engagement, every name. She opened it to the entry from Omicron 4. Read the names. Read the count. Opened it to today's entry. Read the names. Read the count. Put it away. Outside the viewport, Sector 7 moved past. The ordinary dark, the scattered light. She thought, we'll need more ships. She thought, we'll build them. She thought, the number is going up. 6 months after the Sector 7 engagement, the Council ratified the Joint Rapid Response Initiative, a human Veth Rapid Deployment Unit, 12 ships, human command, Veth Engineering, stationed at 3 points along the historically most contested border sectors. The vote was 31-2. The two who voted against it were both Cerelian, and one of them changed her vote before the session closed after looking at the engagement footage from Sector 7 for the second time and thinking about what she had seen. The human membership evaluation process had been running for 14 months. It was, as Oreth Velsen had predicted, thorough and long and requiring of patience. The Droon had designed the process, and it reflected their nature. It was asking not only whether humanity met the criteria, but whether humanity understood why the criteria existed. Carla Ewan navigated it with the same calm she had brought to every room she had ever walked into, carrying less formal power than she deserved. She answered every question accurately. She did not perform certainty she didn't have. She did not soften disagreements into agreements. In the 14th month of the process, she sat across from Oreth Velsen in a small room, not the chamber, a smaller meeting room, 2 chairs, no tears, no observation. And the Droon elder said, "The question I keep returning to is whether your species understands limits." "We do," Carla said. "And yet, we understand limits," Carla said. "We just don't always accept them." Oreth Velsen looked at her for a long time. "There is a council saying," the elder said, "the galaxy is what it is. We have been saying it for 10,000 years." "I know," Carla said. "And you disagree." "I think the galaxy is what it becomes," Carla said, "which is partly what it is, and partly what we decide to do with it." Oreth Velsen was quiet. HFY was quiet. You have been calling us myth dwellers, Carla said. I used to want to correct that. Now I think, maybe you were right. We do live in our stories about what's possible. The difference is, we then go and check whether the story was true. And when it isn't, we tell a better one. The Droon elder looked at her for a very long time. Then she said, in Old Droon, a word that no translator rendered. She saw Carla's expression and said, it means, the ones who build the thing they were told they couldn't. Carla didn't say anything. We have been watching you for 44 years, HFY said. In that time you have done 4 things that our models said were impossible. Not unlikely. Impossible. She paused. We may need to revise our models. We'd be happy to help, Carla said. HFY made a sound that might have been, in a 900-year-old Droon, the closest thing to a laugh. Yes, she said. I imagine you would. The full membership vote was held on a Thursday. Humans had kept Earth time and space for 44 years. The Council had never officially acknowledged this, but every session had been scheduled, for 44 years, to avoid conflicts with certain recurring human time markers. The fact that this vote happened on a Thursday was not meaningful. It felt meaningful. Carla Yuan sat in the human section of the chamber. Behind her sat every member of the human diplomatic mission. Behind them, in the expanded observer gallery, sat more humans than had ever been in this room at one time. Crew members, officers, scientists, engineers, who had come to the station for various reasons over the years, and had heard the date and found reasons to still be there. In the second row, Sergeant Adia Osei sat with her crew. The Meridian was in dock. She had 3 days of leave. She had spent most of it in the observer gallery following the membership proceedings in the same way she tracked everything that mattered, which was attentively and without fidgeting. Kwok was beside her. He had brought food, which was technically not allowed in the observer gallery, which he was technically aware of, which did not appear to be altering his behavior. Commander Okafor was not in the gallery. She was in the docking bay. She had spent the morning going over the Meridian's latest repair report. There were 16 items on the list, and she was working through them in order of operational priority. Not because she didn't care about the vote, but because the vote would happen the same way whether she watched it or not, and the repair list wouldn't fix itself. At 1100 station time, her comm pinged. She looked at it. The message was from Carla Yuan. It was 2 words, "We're in." Okafor read it once. She looked at the repair list, looked at item 7, a secondary guidance relay that had been throwing intermittent faults since the Sector 7 engagement. She looked at item 7 for a while. Then she put the repair list down, sat on a crate in the docking bay with the Meridian behind her, and let the 2 words be the 2 words they were. We're in. 44 years. 1 ship. Twice. And all the small impossible math that had been running since Tessevar heard a species broadcasting its music into open space, in case someone was listening. In case someone was listening. They had been. She sat in the docking bay for 12 minutes. The Meridian was quiet around her, the way ships are quiet in dock. Settled, patient. The deep mechanical rest of a thing that has worked hard and will work hard again. She thought about the 40 people who had been on this ship when they drove into 20 Keth warships. She thought about the 290 people on the transports from Omicron 4. She thought about 11,000 people on a Droon colony world who had not known, during 22 minutes of combat they couldn't see, that a patrol corvette was between them and the Keth. She thought about what it meant to tell a story. Not a lie about the present, a story about what the future could be. And then she picked up the repair list and went back to item 7, because the Meridian had work to do. The galaxy was what it became. Time to get back to work.